No until like tomorrow.
Switch forward.
Okay. Welcome to Helicon West, everyone. We're so glad that everybody came out tonight in these treacherous conditions. It's better now than it was a couple of hours ago. So we're really glad that you guys could come to help us celebrate two of our wonderful department lecturers, Robb Kunz and Ann Stark. To begin, we would like to thank Joseph and the Logan City Library, also the USU Writing Center, and Stark Holbrook, our Logan City Poet Laureate, and then all of our Helicon West helpers who make all these events possible. So thank you. If you would like to read during our open mic session, the sign-up sheet is on the back and is at the back. And you can read up to 7 minutes of your work. We have a couple of events coming up. This Saturday from 10:15 to 3 p.m. will be the, what is it called? The Logan,
Right at the library.
Right at the library, sorry. Right at the library conference. It's free. You do need to sign up for it if you'd like to come. And our own Stark Holbrook will be presenting that day. Presentation, how your response to others' poetry makes you a better poet. And so I will put this in the back, and so you can check that out, and you can just go to the Logan Library homepage and register for free. So there'll be several different sessions going on all day from 10:15 to 3. Brock presented last year along with some other fine writers from our community, and it's an awesome opportunity for everyone. So I'll put this on the back. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Our first reader tonight will be Robb Kunz. He hails from Teton Valley, Idaho. He received his MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of Idaho. He currently teaches writing in the English department at USU. He's also a faculty advisor for Sink Hollow, our undergraduate literary magazine at USU. Robb enjoys lowbrow television, books, seltzer water, and cross-stitch. And I know those are all very true because he's been my best friend for a long time. We don't even remember how long. So welcome to Robb.
Thanks. This is a very R-rated piece. I just want to say that. It's R-rated. So hold on tight. It's called The Gay Boy Catches a Bus. And it comes from, it's been revised a million times since the University of Idaho. This was the title of my thesis for my MFA. And this was the lead essay. So when I speak about, in the essay, when I speak about traveling, I developed an intense fear of heights when I was there because they didn't have any mountains. And so I lost my ability to navigate. For some reason that manifested as an intense fear of heights. And so as a result, I didn't fly home. I didn't fly from Spokane to Idaho Falls. I instead decided to take the Greyhound. And it's not, if you haven't taken the Greyhound once in your life, you certainly need to scare the shit out of yourself and to remind you about life, perhaps. So this is called The Gay Boy Catches a Bus. The bathroom light flickers a bleeding white noise. Next to the door, a slice of masking tape covers the light switch, out of order, written in smudged black marker. All 3 slots of the condom and cock ring and watermelon-flavored lube dispenser machine are out of order as well. I'm in the men's bathroom in the Greyhound bus terminal in Butte, Montana, staring at myself in the mirror, soap on my hands, the water still running. The mirror is a strange place to have a conversation, to criticize and reconsider oneself in Butte, Montana at 4 o'clock in the morning. My facial hair needs trimming. It's long and scraggly to cover a double chin. Weight gain over the last 2 years. It's long and scraggly to also appear ignored, unmanscaped, to appear aloof and unconcerned as much as I truly can about appearance. I notice my clothes wrinkled and mismatched, ketchup or blood stain near the bottom hem, boots with plain jeans, nondescript white t-shirt, black worn sweater, the coat with the cigarette burns, and logo of Grand Tardidi. a symbol of my Idaho roots. That should buy me some points with the travelers, the clothes, the facial hair, my concerted efforts to never make eye contact, to walk arm fixed, and none of that fucking runway strut I've been accused of are all calculated efforts to appear straight, even kind of straight. Not queer, certainly not faggy. While on this trip through country, I realized does not think we're here, we're queer, get used to it. That kind of an anthem of identities deserves any reverence. The mirror tells me I'm doing pretty good, that I've made it this far, just keep going. And then a woman in a short black cocktail dress bursts through the door and tells me to make sure no one comes in, just fucking hold the door. She stops and looks over my shoulder into the mirror, whispering, "It's okay, honey, I've seen that before." The cinnamon-colored lipstick, applied hours earlier, feathers up, streaked almost to her nostril. With her pinky still looming over my shoulder, she traces the outline of her lips, scans her teeth, each pocked and yellow, and coughs open-mouthed. She gently touches a canine and winces. Blood pools at the gum line. Motherfucker, and the horse you rode in on. I noticed the stiletto heel of one of her shoes is broken. With her good arm, she pushes open the door to the stall, and I hear the lock click. She sighs heavily before the lid of the toilet drops, and then a rustle of fabric. Silence builds, holds, culminates. Is she waiting for me to leave? She sighs heavily again before the sound of water hitting water cracks into the silence. Be a good boy and give a bitch some privacy, huh? Then the scratch of lighter. I breathe, tell myself to breathe. I notice that my eyes look gray-green. My zipper is still down. A small bloom of wetness appears on the thigh of my jeans. A thin feather of white smoke swells above the stall door before I smell the acrid, burnt alfalfa smell of cheap meth. I have bad eyes. I have glaucoma or gout or fuck all, she says and begins to sob. That's when I head back into the terminal. I'm on my return trip. 7 days earlier, a bus took me through the carved valleys of northern Idaho, through a chip of Washington, between the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana, and into the silent, barren wheat fields covered in a thin white muslin that I recognized as the winter of southeastern Idaho. Back through the small towns, and then I came back through the small towns, curving north through Dubois, which I pronounced Dubois throughout my childhood, through Dillon, where the bus stopped for a mandatory driver break. Gene, driver, encased in greyhound gray polyester trousers, ubiquitous light blue button-up, turned and told us stories about his days in either World War I, which is inconceivable, or World War II, which is also inconceivable. The toothpick in his mouth slid back and forth, rolled by his tongue. He winked at the end of each sentence, smiled, waited for the reaction to "goddamn commies" or "Jew bastards," before realizing he was being ignored, and turned back around. 20 miles south of Butte, the bus stopped at a gas station. Gene was in good form. What do you call a deer with only 3 legs? You know, queer. Queer is a $3 bill. A queer deer, you get it? At the gas station, he gave us 3 minutes. I bought more watermelon lube and a rubber cock ring in the men's room that I would later send to my lesbian friend. She loved it. I smoked a cigarette close to the gas line, way too close, but getting on back on the bus, Gene, who nicknamed me Smokestack, verbally felt it was his duty to prepare us for Butte. It's a doozy of a town. When we get closer, off to your right, I'll point out Lot's wife. Just a hump of white salt. Serves the bitch right. I recognize the Sodom and Gomorrah jab, common bait to raise the fecund images of debauchery and homosexualized sin, as if men of each city sodomized one another in the streets, in living rooms, glistened bodies rolling and bucking without caution of fear, ignoring the innocent children mere feet away, and always Lot, fucking Lot, stuck in the middle, God on one shoulder telling him to protect his daughters, the devil on the other shoulder urging him to rend his clothes and join the fray. I wanted to raise my hand and tell Gene what I knew of Greek and Hebrew renditions, erstwhile theories to staunch the inconvertible preoccupations with stiff dicks and warm holes. Nothing has changed since I left the bathroom. The bus terminal, more of a 20 by 30 box, teems with whispered conversations, people sleeping on luggage and blankets. Lucky few claim the larger chairs and the 2 cement benches. I pick my way through the red-eyed, yawning, hazy faces to my own carved-out spot, my large canvas duffel, purchased with student loans, to aid in my straight-acting contrivance. The red-headed woman who runs the terminal empties coffee grounds into a trash can. Her eyes find me walking back to my luggage and she smiles. The room seems to swell every time I enter or leave it. Swells the way a room does when a person imagined everyone staring, everyone calculating posture, gait, and swing of the arm. Each time I pull inside of myself as if to find that gay character, hiding in the deep parts of my brain. I need to cage him, blind his sibilance and exaggeration. I avoid the faces of those overheard on the bus calling one another faggot and cocksucker. They would tell stories of sexual prowess, careful to intone how much they loved pussy and titties. One voice told of how his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Ashley, once tried to finger his asshole. She had heard from girlfriends that it was the new thing. He had yelled loudly, "I'm no faggot," before leaping off the bed. It isn't hard to find this kind of language or story if you listen hard enough. I pull out the book of easy crossword puzzles for the English major in all of us, and I swear to God that was the title of the book. And forget the name of that guy who wrote that play about the guy who yelled, "Stella, Stella," even though I remember Brando in the movie, that incredible white wife beater. I puzzle over the love song of Jail for Prufrock. Was it do I dare to eat a peach? Or do I dare to eat the peach? And the name of the poem by Virgil, 6 letters, starts with A. No one notices me picking through literary terms and figures. A large Latina woman sleeps in the corner of the terminal. Her bed is a stack of sea cushions and her pillow a large baby blue down jacket. People walk around her to get to the soda machines. Her sleep seems peaceful and undisturbed. The Simpsons movie still plays on the small 9x13-inch television with a gaggle of children still looking at it. The movie plays on a loop. I've seen it twice since being in the terminal. Once while arching my body left to see around a 14-year-old girl's head. She swung her brown hair, combed it, patted it with aplomb. Her father, a large, balding welder plumber type, paced around the terminal, offering everyone powdered donuts out of a basket, while explaining in a voice built for bellowing how when Susie Lynn and he reached Vegas, he was hitting the goddamn slots. A blonde, toothless woman heard him and yelled across the room, "Hey, that's where I'm gonna go get my tits done." Groovy. The surgery in question was meant to get her a job as a stripper, get back custody of her teenage son, and take him to a Giants game. The second time through the movie, I sit electric and rigid. 2 young men sit on either side of me, dangerously close to a wayward move of a boot, an arm drifting into close contact with any movement, and I feel the entirety of my body. My lungs fill and empty, I act calm. Halfway through the movie, the guy on my left elbows me gently. Strung as tight as I am, the gesture makes me jump and squeak. "Shit, sorry man, didn't mean to, just wondered if you had any gum." "No, I don't have any gum." I spread my legs wide, like men do, careful not to cross them out of habit. I sit still, panic when getting up to smoke, only barely brush my elbow against the shoulder of the young man to my right, and he ignores it. As I stand, the woman with the meth and the bruises comes out of the bathroom, crossing the terminal, and stops at the welcome desk. The red-headed woman reaches down, pulls out a white garbage bag full of clothes and what I swear to God looks like bowling trophies, hands it to her, and she is battered, is what I see. She catches my eye and smiles, reaches down, lifts her skirt a little until she knows I can see her underwear pink and tattered. She smiles again, rummaging with both hands in the trash bag until she finds lip gloss, draws the wand across both lips, tries to be sexy, but winces with pain. 2 feet in front of me, a 20-something man intercepts her actions as meant for him. As I push open the large glass doors on the opposite side of the terminal and enter the freezing air of Butte, I watch him get up and cross the room towards her. He grabs his crotch, and she lifts the damaged arm onto the desk, waiting for him to make his way over. It's 4:13 in the morning, and it begins to snow. Outside, I slide to the side of the building, next to the out-of-order payphone, and light a cigarette. Butte has yet to come alive. Except for the delivery trucks, vans with indistinguishable placards, the city feels small and utterly soft. Pollution from the many lights dusts the low-hanging clouds in a strange orange. The light of the Walgreens across the street flickers and becomes wall grass. I imagine one of my friends in the same place. He, newly out at 26, fits, if not reinforces, the stereotype. We met on the campus of Utah State University during a gay pride rally when they actually used to have them. The once-a-year event brought a strange mix of gays, some in dark glasses and overly straight swagger, and some in midriffs and glitter. Brian, my friend, wore glasses and tried his very best to appear straight. Still, and even with all his costume, his sexuality radiated. Lifting his coffee, smoking a cigarette, taking a breath even, Brian exuded a very, very gay man. He could open his mouth and his purse would fall out. He dated a very naive and wonderful girl for years after getting home from his mission, before venturing to tell his friends the truth. It was so hard not to laugh at his confession, hard not to hug him and tell him, "No shit, sister." I imagine him standing next to this phone booth, smoking this cigarette, pressed under this sky. I feel his fear, or maybe it is simply my fear projected. Blending, passing is not an option for Brian. At the moment, I feel blessed and grateful and utterly sad that it is an option for me. My grandfather once said that he used to beat up faggots in the Navy, but everybody deserves a life. My mom once asked why anyone would ever choose to be that way. A student during class said, "The reason why we shouldn't allow gay marriage is because of AIDS. All our insurance rates would go up. It's not like cancer." The first day of my master's at a meet and greet, just leaving the bathroom, two men talking, "Dude, don't worry, we'll pee together. Kind of like women, but I'm not a fag." The first time I heard the word fag, I imagined a drag queen lifting a small fan to her face and saying, "You're damn right, motherfucker." 5:52 a.m. in the terminal, and it happens. A bus with passengers coming from Idaho Falls, Idaho, pulls into the station. The room livens and heats. The woman on her way to new breasts pulls out a hip flask, drinks as if no one sees her, tilts her head and gurgles. We catch eyes and she motions to her eyes, plugs it with 2 fingers. I find out later the flask is full of NyQuil. People grab bags and boxes, wander like zombies out into the cold, and prepare to board the bus that is pulled up. The crowds of faces shift, and it's new blood. I feel myself watching for something familiar, a face, a look, a swagger, and it happens. Dressed in a lavender shirt, tan corduroy jacket, svelte cap, and perfect white teeth, I watch him put down his vintage Dior luggage and sit in the corner. Like electricity, like knowing who the person is coming up from behind you, even before you turn to look, we catch eyes and blammo. If he knows about me, he doesn't make a sign, doesn't tap his foot 3 times as if in a bathroom stall. He stares away from me, out beyond the windows, out into the dark night of the city to remain safe. More passengers file into the terminal, all of them dirty and angry, sleep-deprived and wandering around like spirits caught in the in-between. An old man in a dirty, smeared Massey Ferguson hat finds his way through the crowd and stands in front of me, silent and inspecting. Both seats on either side of me are empty. Mind if I sit? Sure. He mentally looks over both of the blue plastic seats, debating which one to choose. He locks eyes with me. This has always been my problem. Do I go right or do I go left? What would you choose? I feel my stomach drop. I feel everything drop, especially my can of Mountain Dew from my lap and onto the floor. Does he know? How can he tell? What did I do wrong? The light green soda drifts towards his boots before I can shake myself and grab for the can. I apologize and run to the bathroom for paper towels. Coming back, I notice the meth woman and 20-something gracefully making out in the corner. He has his hand under her skirt, moving his arm in a familiar rhythm. No one minds. The green hat man pulls salami and cheese from his green army-issued duffel bag. I mop the soda quickly, wordlessly. "Moose piss," he says. "Excuse me?" "Moose piss. That's what it looks like. It looks like moose piss." "Oh, the soda." I don't meet his eyes. Where are you headed? "Moscow," I tell him. I'm headed back to Moscow, Idaho. Moscow, I've been there. It's a pretty place. He notices the title of my crossword book still laying open. I always preferred Hemingway or Faulkner. I would take a bullfight over incest any day. He slips a perfectly cut triangle of cheese into his mouth. His tongue reveals a strip of burgundy running down the center. He is missing the middle finger on his left hand. Both of his boots are untied. "What was your favorite Hemingway novel?" I asked the question to give me time to recover. I pegged him for a hillbilly. I thought retired vet with PTSD. I thought a man incapable of having read either Hemingway or Faulkner. All of them. Yep, all of them. I wouldn't cross the street to piss on Faulkner if he was on fire. Not even Absalom. Absalom? I say, overly excited. I take a breath and say it again slower. beginning to warm up. Do you like Faulkner? He asks. I do. A lot. Do you read a lot? He was drunk. He was a drunk pussy. Yakpanatha County, my ass. There is a smile in his eyes, a tingle of playful energy. I say, do you read a lot of books? He looks me over, puts away his salami, his cheese, his bone-handled knife. You're gonna be okay, son. Just fine. Fucking good luck in Moscow. He walks to another side of the terminal and sits down right next to the svelte boy in the cap and the jacket. 6:30 in the morning and the sun rises slowly in the east just over Wallgrass. Butte wakes up and that means cars and buses and trucks and the road's suddenly full of people traveling. I smoke again next to the phone booth, but now strangely the out of order sign is gone. Morning and its small peculiarities have always fascinated writers. They wax poetic about colors. They talk of silence bursting into song. They describe clouds chased away, leaving in their wake a beautiful and crafty blue sky. I burn my fingers on a cigarette smoke to its limit. My bus arrives in 20 minutes. I drift back into the terminal and everyone talks and eats and heads for the bathroom and everyone, all of them, are alive. Meth women, 20-something, green hat, doppelganger, red-headed women all burst into activity with the coming of the sun, and I put a finger to my lips and want to yell out, shh! But I sit instead. I am tired and gay and tired, gay and single and too old to feel like gay is much of an excuse anymore for anything. Two things become clear in my mind. The only gay agenda is staying alive. Being trapped in a bus terminal in the very early morning in Butte, Montana blooms into serendipity. A woman using meth can cause you to look at your green and gray eye, dark circles, and climb into the warm center of not knowing and find capable resilience. My bus is here. It is driven by a toothless woman named Nelda. She has 4 kids, 3 of which are currently serving time in the state pen. The bus, 2 hours late, is sold out. My options, wait for 24 hours in Butte, in the same goddamn terminal I'm in now, and catch the next one, or sit in the stairwell of the bus with 4 other people to Missoula. I choose the stairwell and spend 90 minutes crammed against a kid that recently out of jail himself jerks and seizes and breaks my cell phone in half with his boot, but I won't realize that for hours to come. Thanks.
Awesome, Rob. It was great to hear you read and to be a featured reader here at Helicon, so great job. Okay, and next up we have Ann Stark, another wonderful lecturer in our English department, and we've known each other for a really long time too, and that's great. So Ann Stark has been writing, teaching, and supporting Cache Valley writers since 1990. Her fiction and nonfiction publications range from Huffington Post to UNLV's Word River. She's working on her second novel, the first one having won honorable mention in the Utah Division of Arts and Museums 2015 Original Writing Competition, is still in the submission mill. Her former USU English department students, however, are publishing far and wide, and to her great pleasure, most of them come back to say, hey. Welcome, Ann.
Thanks, you guys, and I want to thank Star and Mitch and Shannon and all those who support Helicon, especially Star, Helicon's founder and my dear friend, and those who came. My husband John's here, my writing group, Carol Herbert and Kate Herbert are here. Some of my students too. I'm really glad to see you. So before I start, and I'm going to read 2 pretty short pieces. I'd like to just take a moment for Ursula Le Guin, who died earlier this week. If you haven't read her story, Those Who Walk Away from Amelas, you really got to a precursor to the Hunger Games, The Giver, all that published in '73. But I think that story kind of started me on wanting to be a writer. Just loved her work. Okay, so 2 short pieces, and Star asked me to talk a little bit about my fiction, and so in reflecting on it, I realized that you don't reflect on something like this until you are of a certain age. And so it made me realize I'm of a certain age, but that's okay because I discovered two things. And one of them is that I tend to write about suburbia, which isn't too much of a surprise since I grew up in the LA County, San Gabriel Valley. I write about how suburbia affects relationships, how living there affects relationships, and how it affects the wild animals that inhabit there or around there. And two, I try to put diverse characters in my fiction. Mostly, my main character is white, middle class, who gets in over her head, which is no surprise. And that was the basis of my first novel, Berkeley Sisters, in which a young mother goes to a play and after that becomes enmeshed in the family of child traffickers. And so tonight, though, I'm going to read from my novel I'm working on now first, and that's called Nico's Bar, and it's set in southern Mexico. It's about a young newlywed couple from Minnesota who go down to work for an NGO doing clean water technology and get embroiled in a bunch of scandals down there when they're there. And so here, last time I was at Helicon, I read a little from that novel about character Carla inviting the main character Isabel to a spa. And so here's a continuation of that from the chapter Mud, 2 pages from that, this part of that chapter Mud. Giving me a strange look, Carla dragged me out of the bus and onto the dusty street, the clamor of trucks, buses, cars, and mopeds bouncing over the cobblestones. People congregated around small carts with umbrella tops, coming away with a peeled back roasted ear of corn or an ice cream treat in paper. The temperature was mild in the 60s but forecasted to raise during the day. But it didn't matter what the temperature was. People were going to enjoy frigid ice cream or caramelized corn kernels or steaming chestnuts. But we didn't stop to eat. Down 2 side roads and across a small corrugated bridge, over what looked like a moat, we came to an isolated building with a big blue and white awning shading the pink front door. Ah, the spa, she said, the most delightful in all of Mexico. Have you been to more than one, I asked her. Of course, Guapa. I've been to several in La Capital, and this is better than those, and those are obviously better than all the others, so therefore esta es el mejor, she said, using the Spanish phrase for this is the best. The pink door accompanied by a brass bell, which we rang, and immediately we were greeted by an older woman with a bright white square apron over a black jumpsuit. Her hair was the most brilliant platinum blonde, and her glossy makeup was impeccable. Doña Amelia, Carla exclaimed, immediately embracing and kissing her. Mi estrella, this is easy, she said, which made me smile because she pronounced my name as easy, and I realized she rarely had ever used my real name. Carla was obviously an intimate of this woman, referring to her with yet another endearment, this time one that meant my star. It made me feel better to hear a brand new nickname because I suspected Carla called everyone she liked by the same names, darling or beautiful. Cariña, Carla said, drawing me to attention. Doña Amelia does not always treat her customers personally. This is a special day because she knows it's my saint's day. Notwithstanding, we are lucky to be under her influence. Today, after the treatment, you will emerge from your cocoon more beautiful and lovely than is possible. You are already lovely, Cariña, but Doña Amelia finds the way to bring that secret, untapped serum of loveliness to the surface. For this, gracias, mi estrella. Carla took one of the older woman's hands into both of hers and pulled it to her chest. The woman, tilting her head a millimeter, took a dancer's step forward and accepted the compliment. Damas, let me explain to you the schedule today. We will do the nails and the hairs and all that, but first we will have the mud. After the mud, then the showers of rain, then the shopping for potions and scarves, and then Borromeo will escort you personally back to your bus. You did take the bus this morning, preciosas? See, Carla told her, eyes dancing. I was in shock. I tried to hide it, but my mind was circumnavigating the collection of words I had just heard. Potions, hairs, mud. Carla hadn't mentioned any of these. Maybe I'd heard it, but I didn't understand the Spanish word for mud, barro, was actually wet dirt, and that's what we were getting. Since Carla had offered to pay for the whole thing, my present to myself is my gift to you, she had said. I was overwhelmed by her generosity. I had heard that a spa treatment wasn't nearly as expensive as one in the States, but Carla was co-owner of a struggling bar, and I recognized the value of her gift. When Doña Amelia returned with gossamer nylon robes and 2 puffy cotton hand towels, I understood that semi-public nudity was going to be involved. Luckily, I hadn't eaten much breakfast, only a slice of papaya and a pan dulce purchased at the bread store, and I had shaven my legs the night before. But I was shy about the other parts. Also, because I was a bit claustrophobic, I hoped that my face wouldn't be covered with mud. I was wrong. Do I have to take off my underwear? Por supuesto, cariña, Carla said, of course. Are they going to cover our faces? Por supuesto, cariña. I was going to have to either stop asking questions or get used to hearing that phrase. Of course, darling. As we shed the sheer robes and lay down side by side on the hard cots, my shoulders eased gently back onto the canvas. The temperature had risen even more than expected, and Doña Amelia suggested we take our treatment out under the white sail awnings on the brick patio behind the studio. Sure, my breasts were exposed to the world, and out of the corner of my eye I saw a young man at the side offering oranges to one of the female staff. But the soft, warm breeze was liberating, and the excitement of getting a whole-body mud treatment was starting to take hold. It may also have been an effect of the 2 ambrosia drinks that in stem goblets that I downed before I took off my panties and my bra and hung them on a peg. There's a first time for everything, I told myself, in a partially buzzed state. I grabbed a few pieces of papaya from the crystal plate. So that's the little excerpt, and I hope to share more. And by the way, Rob, your piece was so awesome. I loved it so much. Okay, so this piece was recommended for publication by our beloved, dear, late Dr. Ken Brewer, beloved poet and professor at Utah State. He gave me the encouragement that made me feel, it just bolstered my self-confidence, and it made me realize how much mentorship is to my students, and so I try to really, really give them that plug to go publish. This one broke through the coveted circle for me of Glimmer Train, honorable mention, and then it got a place in Père Noir where it's resting. Okay, it's called Figs. My mother and I meet once a month for lunch, and she pays the bills. Last month it was Jasmine's, an all-woman coffee house with magenta curtains and tablecloths that hide people well. The restaurants she chooses are never ones that I can afford. But when she would make the date, I agreed to it, knowing I might regret it. When I finally spot Henrietta through the crowd at Figs and wave to get her attention, she acknowledges me, as she usually does, by making the sign of the cross with the left hand. The left hand is the way the witches do it, she says out loud. I check, as I usually do, for listeners. Figs is a health food bistro with a commanding view of the Bay Bridge. There's too much light here. Henrietta is at her best in the dark. She's a stout woman with a low, clear voice developed on the stage. While she's not recognizable for her face, people will usually approach our table and ask for an autograph. I love you, they say. Your shows are so great. If she doesn't turn heads with the outrageous comment she projects out the room, people are compelled to eavesdrop because of the sound of her voice alone. She's adopted an aristocratic accent by saying her R's, with her mouth shaped like an O, the sound of a Southern belle in a Tennessee Williams play. People spend hours listening to her talk about Nora on the radio. I count the minutes until I hear the word Nora. What I know about Nora is that she's a girlfriend of Henrietta's, about the same age as I am, who stays at her place on an irregular basis. She's not even a relative, but Henrietta treats her like a favorite daughter, and I cannot hide my jealousy of her. Sometimes I think she's only a metaphor for my mother's radio commentary, but after Nora has supposedly visited my mother's apartment, I see 2 different brands of cigarettes squashed in her crystal ashtray. Henrietta and I do not share surnames. She never went by mother. I was 6 before I could pronounce her first name, my mother unsuccessfully trying to correct my we into a re. The surname Poole is a name she chose for herself when she divorced my father 27 years ago when I was still in diapers. On her weekly radio program called Poole's Reflections, she offers unique commentary on popular culture and art, one that Berkeley drivers listen to on the ever-congested I-580 freeway. She is so busy that I feel imposing when I call her with news of my kids' illnesses or report cards. Every time we meet, Henrietta interjects a cheerful declaration such as, "Ooh, poor Lizzie, she always looks like she's got a babysitter waiting." Then I redden and feel compelled to explain that I do not. It's true that I have to find someone to watch the kids when I meet her at the posh restaurant she chooses, but I usually have no trouble getting my husband or neighbor to do it. But she's right about my worried expression. When I look at myself in the store window, I see my father's middle-aged face, framed by my unruly hair. As I lean toward her on the Lucite table between us, she offers a rhetorical question. "Oh, this country is in terrible shape, don't you think?" She sighs dramatically. I can hear her radio voice in the lilts and stops of her speech. "What do you mean?" I ask. I spread the napkin on my lap. It's a cloth napkin, neatly folded like an origami bird. "Oh, how could you not know?" she declares. "The Bible pounders want to exclude gays from the conversation and superimpose their agenda on all public discourse, including school curricula." Another sigh. "They say that true genius arises from adversity. I suppose it's true, but times like these make me want to shut down the mic and pick up a placard." She takes out her pack of Skoal and seems to think about inserting a plug, but after looking around, she replaces it in her gaping tote. "Then again, we have to go to work sometime, don't we?" I hiccup and draw back at the remark, because after my last pregnancy, I haven't returned to my job at the bank. Her voice is husky. "Something's got to go. It's either the readings or the movie reviews. I don't have time for it all anymore. I think you should stick to radio. You're good at it." "And then they tell me the readings are important too," she says. "We can do without our daily bread, but not the protein." I cast a quick glance at the adjacent table. The two gray-haired ladies seated there are happily munching their Swiss chard, oblivious to our conversation. Their happiness inspires me to give my mother another chance. "Did you know last week that they read one of Beckett's plays on KABY? I listened to the whole thing while the twins were sleeping." A heavy-set blonde waitress comes, sets down iced tea, and takes our orders. I order tilapia, my mother linguine. And Henrietta asked me who had read the Beckett play. "They read Samuel Beckett without consulting me? Shame on them. Which play was it?" "Cascando. How come you didn't hear?" "Oh," she croons, like Blanche Dubois. "I must have been listening to Nora." I swirl my drink like a Chinese tea leaf reader. 10.5 minutes have elapsed. "So what's happening to Nora?" I ask, resisting the sound of her name coming out of my lips. "Oh, it's the same thing. She's miserable. Her boyfriend got jealous and he backhanded her. She threw him out and now she can't wait till he calls her again. I don't know. But do tell me about Cascando. I'm weary of hearing about the suffering of women." This statement doesn't sound convincing at all, and I want to call her on it, but the waitress comes with our meals and Henrietta asks for more tea. "I think it's inexcusable," I say, when the Valkyrie-sized woman has left, "what Nora will put up with. Can't she just forget about men for a while? I mean, she's talented, respected. She should be able to find activities that stimulate her." "Sex is not an activity, honey. It's an appetite." My mother shakes her fork. "You were lucky to find an attentive man the first time around." "That's right," I say, torturing my salad greens. "You and Nora are part of a different generation," my mother continues. "If I had been able to find a man who could give me regular, healthy sex, I would not have had to go through all the affairs and the married men. But people didn't look at it then like the way they do now. Why doesn't it work for Nora?" The clattering of silverware rings in the back of my head. "Her concerns are different than yours are, Lizzie. Oh, this tea is refreshing." I twist in my chair and the napkin drops off my lap. As I lean down to retrieve it, I glance at her overstuffed leather carryall. There's an American Airlines ticket sticking out of a New York Times and a dog-eared copy of the Journal of Albion Moonlight marked with colored post-its. Henrietta speaks to the back of my head. "Your napkin lies on the ground like a wounded bird." I jerk upright, reddening. I can never understand her metaphors. We continue eating in broken silence, me wondering about her undisclosed trip, while she asks questions about her 3 grandchildren and their successive birth order, including the twins. The waitress approaches with our bill and hesitates, looking from one of us to the other. I figure the total amount represents a month's worth of cereal. Without pause, my mother produces her card. The waitress's keen eyes scan over the name, and then she and my mother engage in a flush exchange about her recent radio program. The waitress asks for Henrietta's autograph, which she happily provides on the back of the woman's order pad. While they talk, I study my mother's face. Her coiffed black and gray hair doesn't move as her head bobs up and down. How little I know about her. An airline ticket. Why didn't she tell me? "You said you had something more on the Beckett play." I hesitate. If I tell her what I really want to say, that I recently designed a new lawn ornament that's selling well at the farmer's market, she will laugh and reply, "So my Lizzie wants to be an artist. That's precious." Henrietta wiggles around the octagonal table and gives me a hug. Gotta go. Nora's coming over this evening. She hoists her heavy bag. I liked the reading. It was dramatic, but not as powerful as you could have done. Good, then. Meet in a month? Yes, and thanks for the lunch. Are you sure I can't give you something? I look into her brown eyes, and she stares back into my light blue ones. We cannot seem to disengage. Of course not. You've got the babies to think of, and I'm only me. She pauses as if she had more to say, but seems to think better of it. As she squeezes the gaping tote between her arm and shoulder, she looks like a schoolgirl. When she moves away, however, her walk betrays the trace of a limp. She's favoring her left side for some reason, something I hadn't noticed before. The waitress returns. Would you like something else, dear? A little dessert? Do you have any figs? Figs? Now why, the name of the restaurant, just wondering. Oh, that's cute. The name refers to Mediterranean fare. She smooths the stray blonde curl against her head. How about a cup of Moroccan coffee? It's on me. Because of my mother? Oh no, you just look like you could use a pick-me-up. But if you'd rather not, no, sure. I reply, a cup of coffee would be lovely. She brings the coffee, I drink it slowly, pausing at each sip, staring at the San Francisco Bay and the one lone white sail there. When minutes go by without seeing the waitress or the bill for the drink, I get up and set out with just a little more spring in my step. Thank you very much.
That was awesome, Anne. I'm glad to have heard that in its entirety. It's definitely an award-winning piece, so that's great. Okay, so I need to run back and get the open mic thing. Does anybody else want to? Oh, Rob will get it for me.
No, I'm not. I'm over there.
Oh, you're going. Okay. This is pretty good. We have 4 people signed up. Does anybody else want to sign up?
Brittany does.
No, I already signed
Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. So before we move into that, I just wanted to announce our next Helicon West will be February 8th. Another of our wonderful department lecturers, Tony Rogiers, will be reading, and is his book launch. So that'll be great. And again, to remind you about this conference at the Logan Library. Okay, I'll read our names of our first 3 readers, and they can come on up and share with us. So it will be Timothy, and then Ron Jensen, and then Nathan Allen. Oh, if you do not want to be recorded, let Amias know when you come up, okay?
So today I have some flash fiction, which I thought of reading today because I unearthed it in all my stuff after my post-college cleanup. And I actually wrote this when I was taking Professor Stark's class. And I made some edits when I first came out with it. So, flash fiction jumped in. The opposing brick walls of the old alleyway in downtown Los Angeles seemed to compress on Jose like the trash compactor in Star Wars. That was the first movie he ever saw when he was first taken in by his foster family 5 years ago. He stood by one of many discarded piles of wooden pallets, and while the group of about a dozen stood on the opposite side. They spoke in whispers to his friend Alejo in rapid Spanish, but Jose couldn't hear them. The constant glares and frowns directed at him were explanation enough. Ever since he started middle school, the older white students picked on him relentlessly for his skinny appearance and nerd tendencies, even if it was Star Wars. Alejo had suggested to him months ago to see his cousin, known as Diablo, about joining his gang for protection. "It's okay, Jose," Alejo had assured him when Jose had told him of the latest harassments. "I was picked on by gringos myself, but I joined up with my cousin and they left me alone. Nothing to worry about." Diablo and his gang wore white shirts with random blue markings and the occasional 67 like you'd see on football jerseys. But it was Diablo's tattoos that struck stuck out like a lightsaber on Jose's eyes. Dark, jagged lines made his face look like a devil with horns, which spiraled along either side of his shaved head. His throat contained a stylized MS. Jose couldn't help but compare him to a Dark Lord of the Sith like Darth Maul. Jose was having second thoughts in that alleyway, though. His foster father was a policeman who cracked down on local gangs, including the infamous MS-13, and here they were in front of him. He had gone to the principal and his foster father for help, but nothing they did stopped the name-calling and pranks. Legs would appear in crowded halls to trip him constantly like a trick of the Force. Remember, Jose, his foster father said to him one morning in his blue uniform, wiping Jose's tears of frustration. I will always be here to help you, like Master Yoda. He altered his voice to sound deep and raspy. Help you again? Yes. Jose had laughed and hugged him before he left for school. But lately his foster father was working overtime, and the harassment increased. When his favorite Chewbacca pen was stolen, he burned with anger and asked Alejo to see his cousin that day. His anger was gone, but as he watched the small game decide his fate, a line repeated in his memory as though his brain were set on replay. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. He had heard the initiation rituals gangs did, and he knew he was going to suffer. If he tried to run now, they would gun him down like C-3PO and Empire Strikes Back. Jose, said Alejo suddenly. Jose's head perked up as Alejo walked over to him. Diablo and the rest of his clique were spreading out from their huddles, smirks replacing their frowns. Jake felt more and more like a womp rat. Okay, he'll help you, but you have to be jumped in. But Diablo says you gotta do a job afterwards to prove you deserve help, Alejo said to Jose's ear, putting his arm around his shoulder. But the gesture didn't help. What job? Jose said with a sharp whisper, panic pumping from his heart. Alejo sighed. Nothing hard, but if you want help, you gotta do it. Alejo finished evasively. Jose hesitated. His foster father's face appeared in his mind's eye, but so did the teasings, trips, and Chewbacca disappearing into another's pocket. Alejo, barked Diablo. Alejo jumped, whispered a quick good luck to Jose, and dashed to rejoin the group. Diablo walked in front of the burly group, sizing them up for a minute before pointing to three of them. They separated themselves and took off their shirts to reveal elaborate tattoos of their own, each misshapen by the bulky muscles they blanketed. They made the white kids who teased Jose look like Jawas. Alejo will count, Diablo announced loudly. Jose's breath shuddered as adrenaline poured hotly through his veins. Jose, your shirt, Alejo called, reaching out an arm. Jose pulled off his Boba Fett shirt, a gift from his 15th birthday, with difficulty. It was like pulling off a straitjacket. He folded it hastily with fumbling hands and tossed it to Alejo. A random breeze licked his bare skin and goosebumps popped up. Jose flexed his muscles and balled his hands into fists. One of the three chuckled at his lame attempt at manliness. Go, Diablo yelled, and the trio pounced. A left hook smacked his jaw as a leg arced into his left hip. 1. Those spots rang like bells of pain in his body, even as more blows rained down on him. 2. Jose rapidly put his arms up around his head as 2 fists socked his stomach. 3. 2 of them performed lightning jabs on his forearm like punching bags. Another performed a hook on his right funny bone. Jose was sure it was paralyzed. 4. A shoed foot hit the back of his left knee and it collapsed, Jose's knee hitting the asphalt ground with a sickening thump. 5. Jose closed his eyes. The multiple limbs blurred so fast he couldn't have seen them anyway, and even more fists struck his shoulders and back. 6. Jose was now on his knees with his arms wrapped around his head as the three continued their savage abuse. 7. With the exception of Alejo, who was counting and wincing for Jose's pain, the rest of the gang was shouting crude and profane words. 8. They cheered as Jose got lower to the ground like hammers driving a giant nail into the earth. They shouted suggestions of where to hit him and increase his pain. 9. One of the trio heard a good piece of advice and kicked sharply like a football player kicking a field goal right between Jose's legs. 10. The pain shot up to Jose's head and back down like a slinky. His eyes rolled into his head as his hands went to his groin. He slumped onto his right side when a gang member socked him with a stunning punch to the left side of his head. The other side of his head slammed almost as hard onto the asphalt. 11. The next spurts of pain came exclusively from kicks now. The three kicked him as if he were a soccer ball they were fighting for control. 12. Jose felt a kick slam to his lower back where his kidney sat. A wave of nausea swirled in his stomach. 13, Alejo yelled. The trio stepped back from Jose, where he gave labored breaths in his fetal position. Jose's eyes strained to see through his blurred vision. Diablo towered over him. What now? Jose panted, oblivion threatening to overtake him. You're going to take my Uzi and wave your gringo cock goodbye. Jose's heart froze. After a few cold seconds, he surrendered to the darkness. As it swallowed him, he swore he heard the maniacal laughter of Emperor Palpatine. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, Ron. Growing up, got my family. For years, I was single, and all alone, without a wife or child of my own. Now I have a wife and stepdaughters too. They blessed my life in ways not a few. I want to be a good head of the house and be a great leader to my children and spouse. They're also great to accept me. I'm glad to be a part of a family. State count. When the last state counts time began, it was just before the eclipse of the sun. Now we'll have another one soon, shortly before the eclipse of the moon. So go to the state counts and hear the speakers talk, where they won't leave you in the dark. From what called faith. I was shocked to hear they'd passed away. When I heard the news, I thought, no way. I enjoyed knowing you in drama school. You partnered on my day. You were so cool. You did good singing. It was 5th grade time, so you star in life, you could earn dough. Now you're singing with the angels above. Let it be known, you are loved. Thank you.
Hello. I'm a little shorter than everyone else. This is a piece called Blue and Yellow Tears. And it's all in how you mix the two, and it starts just where the light exists. The guitar wrapped around my neck fumbles under my shaking fingers, a weight that feels cheap to bear, and my throat, full of burning lump, tries to sing a song that I don't understand in this context. Well, you'll never find it if you're looking for it. The sight of a baby's casket is horrific, but it isn't what is breaking me. And you never would have thought in the end how amazing it feels just to live again. It's a feeling that you cannot miss, and it burns a hole through everyone that feels it. His long, greasy blonde hair probably hasn't been washed since his 7-month-old suddenly died for no reason that anyone has been able to explain. And he fumbles along with me between screeches and wails in a suit that his wife must have made him wear, the song he asked me to sing at his baby's grave service after a small funeral with no more than a dozen people attending. Should have said something, but I've said it enough. By the way, my words were faded, rather waste my time with you. The people behind him couldn't see his twisted and manic weeping face, but they could see him rock and bob his head like he was trying to shake off some kind of reality. And as he sang, were screamed, the song with me. His being gave up and fell to the ground. He broke his vocal cords on the grass and fell his fist 6 feet into the damp earth over and over. Should have done something, but I've done it enough. By the way your hands were shaking, rather waste some time with you. Waste some time with you. Waste some time with you. No one dared touch him, and he laid there with the hardest cry I've ever seen for the rest of the 20-minute service. I quit my job later that day after someone yelled at customer service for 20 minutes because he couldn't handle not having TV for an afternoon. Thank you.
That was great. Good job, everybody. Thank you. So our last 3 readers tonight will be Brittany Allen, Nate Hardy, Kate Herbert.
I'm even shorter than you. We did that on purpose. I brought a couple of poems. This first one is called Research, 4 Days Late. Noun, expulsion of fetus. Noun, disappointment. Synonyms, miscarriage, botch. Feticide, misbirth. Related words, birth control, planned, safety, failure, very abnormal, example, freak accident. Antonyms, continuation or success, a blessing. And this one is called Removal. Doctor, sew my rib bones closed and cut the pulped red screams. The drugs are too deep for me to breach your eye, but the stitches in my cunt need ripped. I've had dry mouth, you see, ever since you licked me with shiny metal teeth, and my girl would like to choke again. Do my scalpel clit undone with tongue, inject latex seed, just don't let my husband see. Thank you.
Hey everyone.
Hello.
So this is, I usually come here and read poetry, but this will be the first time I gave nonfiction a whirl this last semester, and I had Robb's nonfiction class, and it was freaking awesome. So this is a piece called Value. It's about guns. Well, actually, that's not what it's about. I'm just gonna read the damn thing. I stood with the gun broken over my forearm. 2 dense shells dropped into its stainless steel gullet, and I felt heat rise along with ghostly smoke and the aroma of scorched gunpowder. The barrels gave a hollow thunk when I folded the gun back together and laid my cheek on the cool wooden stock. "Pull!" I said, standing in a used pile of rose-colored plastic and brass shells. Mason sent a clay pigeon whirring through the air like a discus. I hugged the trigger, the gun fought against my shoulder, its blast immediately snuffing out my voice, and the clay disappeared into a cloud of dust all in an instant. "Motherfucker," Mason jeered, cramming bullets into the other gun and snapping it shut. "Watch this." He slouched in untied shoes and grungy sweatpants, clutching my father's Remington. Pop had hesitantly let him use the gun because it was the only other skeet shooter we had. It had stacked, obsidian-colored double barrels and a mural of birds engraved into its mahogany stalk. The bouquet of pheasants was depicted in flight, detailed down to the pupil and individual feather. They looked as pristine as insects caught in dark amber. As I reached to pick another neon orange clay from the ground, I heard Mason's thumb slit the safety off, sending a fleeting sense of unease through my stomach. When I learned to shoot, Pop's eyes never left the safety. "Boy, your Uncle Scott nearly took my damn head off," I heard him say. "You'd miss him if you didn't know the man, but below his right eye were 2 perfect little scars where lead birdshot pellets had burrowed hot into the flesh. The thought of the sting and jerk of tears made me shake, the pellets moving so fast and silent as to be invisible, suddenly finding a resting place deep in the flesh. Still, I envied the marks they left. Those 2 pinprick scars made him a man. That fool couldn't tell a shotgun from a broomstick," I distantly remembered Pop saying before turning and waiting for Mason to give the word. It was July when an emerald green hummingbird trapped itself in our garage in Kansas City. My little sister Claire and I had been running the hose in the heat. We chased one another around playing dead, and when we got crossed by the stream, water fell glistening from the low-hanging branches of 2 wild oaks towering above us in the noon-high sun. The right tree was growing too old and had black snaggle-toothed branches. Knots from its shallow root system rose above the soil like the backs of serpents and ached to step on. The left was young with light gray rind and thick plume. A mama blue jay used to roost near the trunk where the branches were smooth from having been climbed so often. I'd been scolded by her once for climbing to peek at 3 sky blue eggs tucked into her nest. The cracked earth smelled musky and ancient in the cool water as we played under the nursery drone of hundreds of hidden cicadas. Claire looked like a pudgy dandelion, and I couldn't keep a straight face whenever she tried to play dead. Springing off the ground, she came to snatch the hose from me with a smile-bitten bottom lip and missing baby teeth. I taunted her with it until she pouted at me and threatened to tell Mom. I let her take it. Thrilled, she hoisted it with both hands and slung the beam of water at me. Seconds before she soaked me, I kinked the knot and held the bent hose out to her. "Nate!" she yelled, silly and broken-heartedly. I smiled, looked at her, aiming the hose at my face, and unkinked the knot. "Pull!" Mason said. I sent the clay flying. The Remington opened up the air and swallowed both of us in the smack of its blast. My eyes instinctively closed as if commanded by the gun to do so. In an instant, after the sound had vanished into a distant ringing, I looked up to see that Mason had jerked the trigger too quick and missed the bird. We watched it fall in a waning arch to join the rest of the surviving clays that had vanished into the tall grass. After the sound of the gun faded into the surrounding buttes, and enough silence had settled into the fact that he had missed the shot, I asked, "Watch what, motherfucker?" He returned my tease with a lazy-eyed, piss-off face. Mason couldn't lie to me about losing focus. I knew that man like a brother. I've been watching his lazy eye wander since junior high and over time noticed a pattern to its deviance. When his attention split and found a more enticing object, that eye would follow and take me with it. Too many times I found I was curiously along for the ride. More than once it had gotten me in trouble. I wondered if it affected his aim while we shot. "Toss another," he said. My shirt hung thick with water over the thin collarbones. I took the squelching thing off with some difficulty and flattened into the driveway. Claire and I laid on the warm cement and felt heat radiate in soft mirages through our backs. Pop had gotten home from work a while earlier and I could still hear the click and tinkering of his truck's engine winding down. Even with my eyes closed, I felt the sunlight sting my vision deep into the back of the head. Claire had grown impatient with the brightness and was crouched in the garden lifting bricks for pill bugs. I felt her stand and drift past me. The heat was soft but heavy on my bare chest. I felt pinned to the cement, imagining that the driveway was a ceiling and the heat was holding me upside down to it. I was pulled down from the gentle high by the sound of Claire's voice, alight with excitement. She stood in the middle of the open garage door, bouncing up and down in her wet tangerine and honey-colored sundress, trying to translate her ecstasy through a child's vocabulary. She shouted, "A bird, Nate, a little bird." I rose, attempting to look indifferent, and followed her into the cave-like shade. My head swam as my eyes adjusted to the low light. It was cool. The air in the garage smelled like stale grass and engine breath, humid with the water we had brought in. Claire seemed oblivious to her little body shivering in the presence of the hummingbird. We watched it rage against the ceiling, pulling itself through dingy cobwebs in the corner above an old door that was blocked by burlap cement sacks and broken bicycles. Every few seconds the bird would drop from the rafters and hurl itself full speed at the door's tea-brown window panes. The sound was that of a small, dampened gong. Each time its skull thumped against the glass, the drone of its wings would cut out for a second as if anticipating the bird's fall. Each time it would wind up and start against the ceiling again. Claire, overtaken with the desire to help something small in the way that only children get, took off to find Pop. Her bare feet slapped the smooth concrete and disappeared, leaving me alone with the manic little bird in the looming shadow. It sounded like a tightly wound metronome that had lost track of the music, trying to correct itself. I pulled my glove off and reached for another clay, so there was no risk of it firing. I broke the gun open and laid it gently in its open case. Around Mason, I became acutely aware of how obedient to Pop's rules I was acting. Pop always set the gun gently into its case like an infant into a crib. To him, there was truth in the gun. Keep it bowed to the ground until you're certain, hold your breath, and pull the trigger slow. These were his answers to just about everything, and years of shooting without protection had given him a hilarious case of tinnitus in both ears. I wondered about growing up without guns in the house like Mason had. He said his dad hated guns. He and his father fought often. Though we yelled at one another, Pop owned all the firearms in our home and no one argued with him about authority. When I was young, he hung the gun, a simple 12 gauge that he toted through his college years, above my bedroom door and said I could have it when I was tall enough to reach it. The first time Mason came over, he gawked beneath that gun in the doorway. the way the lamplight whispered off the trigger, the way it hung there with some tempest sleeping inside of it, the fact that he couldn't reach it, it must have looked like he imagined himself, untouchable, powerful, immortal. I noticed his eye wandering towards the bar stools in the basement, curious about bullets. It wouldn't be hard. He nearly lifted me to the idea until he started asking about when my father would be home from work. I heard the slow thump of leather boots from within our house against the hardwood growing near. I straightened up and tried to look like I knew what to do, like I could be indifferent about the hummingbird. I imagined him making a remark about it being just that and telling us to let it go. Claire popped from behind the kitchen door and pointed up at the droning emerald streak as if it was possible to miss in the otherwise silent room. A few seconds later, Pop's figure filled the doorway. A shot erupted a few feet behind my head. My spine instantly jerked attention to every inch of my tensing flesh, waiting to feel the burn of lead. I dropped the clay I held and instinctively shattered against the ground. A few seconds passed and the tremor was replaced by rage. I felt my jaw and fist tighten. When I wheeled around to start telling him off, I was met by a clear-eyed and sinisterly giddy expression. A tremor of excitement was bringing Mason's breath back as a smile opened up on his face. The "I'm guilty, but it's cool" look. He flicked his head upwards. I followed his gaze and met a limp little shadow, unable to hold itself in the thin fall air. It fell below the big, blue dusk moon and thumped into the mouth of the field with all the other maroon birds. "I got it," he said, while I tried to stay mad in front of his callow excitement. He looked like he was on his first adventure with a BB gun. I wanted to remind him that he had just snuffed the life out, but reasoning with Mason always felt superfluous when he was like this. As he took off running through the field with my father's pretty Remington, I remembered the sad excitement I felt holding the first bird I ever killed. Pop had taken the young blue jay in his leathered hand and, with one stiff finger, pushed its ash-white down aside to examine the hole I'd made. A good shot, he called it. A good shot. Its head hung limply across the knuckle of his index finger. I saw my reflection in the black eye. As Mason waded into the tall grass, I reached past the broken clay to pick up my gun and warily followed. "Well, what do you reckon we ought to do?" Pop asked, eyeing me for some sign of a plan. "The bird's stuck in the garage, Dad. We gotta get him out," Claire said, innocently and a little redundantly. "That's right, sugar. Now how do you think we're gonna do that?" He smiled, turning his gaze on me. I wish I hadn't taken my shirt off, standing beneath the hummingbird's steady thumping against the cool glass. After each hit, the way it drummed the air became more desperate and furious. I felt it exhausting itself. We could wait for it to fall, then pick it up softly and take it out to the garden. It would wake up and disappear back into the rhythm of the cicadas. I had these thoughts knowing that if we waited for the bird to fall, it would not fly again. I looked around the array of miscellany, around the garage, and searched for some escape from the tiny bird, which had become the biggest thing in the world at that moment. There, by the corner, in an old ball and boot barrel filled with golf clubs and air rifles, was a big butterfly net on a broom handle. Bingo. I moved towards the barrel with a sense of eagerness warming my stomach, hoping the bird would not find its way out of the garage. The sun had fallen behind the clouds and it was growing dark. There was still enough light to comfortably see, but there were no shadows in the early night. I watched Mason ahead of me, searching around for his kill. I felt small, like a gnat on a window pane, standing in one field in the middle of the Great Plains. It was remarkably still, except for his sweats ruffling in the shadowless grass. With the evening settled a quiet that made speaking feel like an act of audacity. It was the type of quiet that makes you feel naked. It was cold. Wading through the tall grass, I occasionally found whole or mostly whole clays that had evaded immediate destruction. From high above their still pockets in the beige acre, the sun slowly strips them of the brilliant orange color. I looked up to see Mason standing still in a clearing. He looked out of place in the vastness of that field. I could tell his excitement had left, but I wasn't sure what had taken its place. I remembered Pop tossing my first kill into the garden. Blood ran with dirt. Dirt got in its eye, and that's all it was, a body. I watched Mason and the gun drooping at his side with 2 empty shells inside of it. The breath that bloomed and clung briefly from his face looked like a small, tired phantom resting on his shoulder. Fishing the hummingbird down from the stale air was a gang. Okay, I'm done here in 1 second. Walking up from behind, I looked down with Mason at his kill. The brown-colored mockingbird stood there, shaking with a primitive tremor. The only thing dead about it was its right wing, which hung lame at its side, just as still, but sharp with life were its eyes. They were no bigger than the lead birdshot that downed it, wet with peril and black as deep obsidian. I wondered how pain clutched such a small animal. What had left 2 pinpricks on my father's cheek had taken the sky away from the mockingbird. Towering above it, I noticed it looked at me as if at eye level. I felt half a foot tall as its head flicked back and forth forth looking at us. A rivulet of crimson sprung from beneath its cream-colored plume and ran like a hard question down its breast. It knew the answer. It knew the answer to that question. Its kind doesn't last long when confined to the ground. What it wouldn't understand was the hesitation inside the two odd animals lumbering before it. I don't know, that'll be all for right now. So.
I had a couple of different things that I brought, and I was going to read a personal one, but it was a little like theirs, and I thought I'd just do this comedic fiction instead. Some kind of weather to contend with. Mr. Whitfield wasn't very happy with the status quo. 28 years and 2 months was entirely too long to put up with the same old nonsense, and he had been telling Mrs. Whitfield that for 28 years. But today he would do something about it, even if it required his standing stark naked on the street in front of his house or on the corner of 5th and Main with all his particles free in the wind, he told Mrs. Whitfield. These people needed to know, he told her, that he was fed up, and they may not listen to an old guy in a gray suit and a sweater vest, though he'd never really asked them to, she reminded him. But they would certainly pay some attention when his old gray birthday suit, minus sweater vest, showed up. Mrs. Whitfield was knitting him a new sweater vest, and she had heard all this before, even though she wasn't sure who they were and what they would do about anything. So she continued without much hesitation or alarm as he continued to pace between her and the big window at the front of the house in a state of growing agitation, which was not unusual. What was unusual was when he sat down in the large olive green easy chair near the window, sending up a puff of dust mites into the sunlit atmosphere of the room, and began to take off his shoes. Mrs. Whitfield was then just the slightest bit worried, as she had not really seen Mr. Whitfield start naked in broad daylight for going on several years, and she was relatively happy with that status quo. But she kept knitting with the hope that perhaps he just needed to adjust the spot on his sock where she had darned it for him last month, and he had never stopped complaining about the pain it was giving his left big toe. She had suggested that he simply change it to the other foot, where it was less likely to irritate his little toe on his right foot, since it had been generally numb since the incident with the ironing board and his bedroom slippers 3 years previous. He had insisted, though, that a sock could not just be moved helter-skelter from one foot to the other. Socks, he told her, were not a thing to be trifled with. The comfort of one's feet could make or break a day, and she should very well know. So he continued to wear that darned sock on his left foot, and perhaps he was just adjusting it now, she was hoping, since he was not a man who, as a usual rule, ever untied his shoes after having tied them in the morning until retiring to his bedroom slippers at 6:30 in the evening. But by now his left shoe was off, and Mr. Whitfield wasn't even wearing the sock that she had darned for him last month. One large, black-socked foot thumped to the floor as Mr. Whitfield raised the other to untie his right shoe, and Mrs. Whitfield's knitting began to slow noticeably. And he noticed that and smiled victoriously. Someone was going to notice Mr. Whitfield today, and someone was going to know about the unhappy state of the status quo. Mrs. Whitfield thought how the day was really very cold, and how it was not very likely that Mr. Whitfield would get very far with all his particles, as he put it, exposed to the brisk wind that had picked up since breakfast. The leaves had begun to change to gold and red, and some to deep purple. And then with the cold snap they had just been having, he would most likely not appear gray, but would be quite glowing before he could get very near 5th Street and Main. So she told him he should at least wear a sweater vest, or he would be too cold and shivery to say anything that anyone could listen to, and then nothing would happen to this status quo, except that anyone who did hear and see him would have to believe he was even more of a cracked pot than they had previously postulated. By now, Mr. Whitfield had both socks off and neatly tucked into wide black wingtips, and she could see his gnarled old toes like discarded peanut shells spread across the rug,
and she really began to wonder what a sight he was preparing to expose to the status quo and anyone else who just happened to be about town today. Mrs. Whitfield did not feel prepared for his announced and advancing unveiling. For the first time since his barrage began between the spreading of orange marmalade and the stirring of coffee, she paused. She put down her knitting, but then picked it up again. If he was going to show off all his particles, she thought she might want something else to look at. She wrapped the yarn around her little finger twice and looped it over the right needle as she pulled it down and through the stitch, while Mr. Whitfield pulled the end of his black belt through 2 belt loops and the silver buckle, releasing the clasp. She mentioned that he might want to venture outside for just a moment before he exposed himself to the elements to see if it was actually warm enough to be outside without a coat, or shoes for that matter. Mr. Whitfield looked down 72 inches to his bare feet and pondered for a moment. Then he went into the bedroom to retrieve his slippers. He put them on and began to pace once again. Wasn't that just the way it was, he told her. No decent person could even go outside these days, he said, without some kind of weather to contend with when trying to make a point about the status quo. He had to say he was not happy about it, he said. He would have to do something about it before things got really out of hand. He slid the end of his belt back into the buckle and pulled it tight around his waist until it caught in the well-worn hole it had always rested in. Then he tucked it neatly through 2 belt loops and went into the kitchen to make a sandwich. It was almost lunchtime, he told her, although you could hardly tell, he groused, it being so overcast and cold today. Mrs. Whitfield counted the stitches on her right needle and put a marker in to begin the V of the sweater neck. She sighed and looked at the wing tips and neatly tucked black socks next to the olive green chair. Things were admittedly more provoking than usual today when you consider Mr. Whitfield's dangerous behavior, and she did have to think on her feet, so to speak, to sway him from his purpose. She hoped he had gotten that out of his system, and she told him so when he came back in with his tuna on wheat, with sweet pickle on a plate and 8 ounces of cold milk. But she smiled benevolently in his direction as he slid the coaster under his glass on the end table by his recliner. Mr. Whitfield reclined his chair just the right amount and wondered if he ought to put his shoes and socks back on before he ate his lunch, but told Mrs. Whitfield that he thought he might just leave his slippers on all day. They were so comfortable. Mrs. Whitfield said she thought the change might do him good, but considering everything, she was generally contented with things just the way they were.
Thank you to all of our readers. That was a great night. Great job to everybody. Again, a reminder of the conference, and I'll go put this in the back. And our next Helicon, February 8th, Tony Rogier's. Please stack your chairs along the sides help us stack them before you go. And thanks again for coming. One more round of applause.